This is the Aero from Pirate MIDI, and while it looks like a fairly standard, albeit very elegant and compact 3-button auxiliary switch, and while it can act as a 3-button auxiliary switch, this is actually a fully featured MIDI controller that runs their Bridge OS, the same OS that you find in their 6 and 4-button Bridge controllers. I'm super interested in this because while you can use it as a passive auxiliary switch from the jack output, there are two TRS MIDI flexi ports, a USB-C port that can also power the unit or provide MIDI over USB, and then a standard barrel jack to power this. This works with Pirate MIDI's web-based editor, and you can send a lot of MIDI messages per foot switch on here. It supports press and release, tap and hold, double tap. It can route incoming MIDI to other outputs. There's so much stuff going on this, but this is kind of the perfect companion to a compact fractal modeler, in my opinion, especially the FM3. I get asked a lot, what's a good small MIDI controller or a good small auxiliary switch to add to my FM3 to just add a little bit more control with the foot switches in there? I'm going to be using it with my FM9 because I don't have my FM3 here with me, but all of this will apply to the FM3, the VP4, and the AXFX3. So as an introduction to this, and I will do a more in-depth demo in the future with this controlling a whole bunch of fun MIDI stuff, I am going to give this a demo with the FM9 and show you how I would set it up to combine the scenes functionality on the FM9 with the effects layout. So let's dive in. Before we take a look at the Aero and how I've set it up, I'll show you this FM9 preset that I've put together. I've used 3 of my favorite amps, and I'm using 6 scenes total. Essentially, I have a slightly drier version of each amp set up with a variation on there. The FAS Stealth Blue I'm using as my main chunky amp. I have a variation that just adds a stereo BBD delay. Scene 3, I'm using the JCM 800 model. Scene 4 adds a phaser and a lexicon style circular delay to that. And then scene 5 is using the AC30 model. On scene 6, I'm adding a comp and a rhythmic delay to all of that. I'll just let you hear scene 1 and 2 because this is my normal song and dance, right? Beautiful stuff. We will hear the other scenes in there, but I want to use the Aero to switch scenes. Before I do this, we do need to do a tiny amount of setup in the FM9 because the FM9 lets you totally customize the MIDI CCs that you use to control different functions. So you can see you can assign the bypass to any MIDI CC you like per block, channels, external controllers, the looper, and in the other section, I've got scene select set up on CC number 34. This is just the number that the AXFX2 used back in the day. So old habits die hard. I've got that one on there. We just need to remember CC number 34 for scene selection. Then we can go over and take a look at the Pirate MIDI editor. This is a web-based editor. So I've just got a USB-C cable going to my computer. What's nice about that is that's also powering the Aero as well. Let's just take a look at what I've got in here. I've just set up these 3 buttons for a press and then a hold function on here to select the 6 scenes. What I've done in the global settings though, is I have come through and set up the flexi port settings. So I've got MIDI out A and MIDI out B on the 2 flexi ports. As you're probably aware, if you've been using TRS MIDI at all, there are 2 competing standards, TRS MIDI Type A and Type B. The flexi ports will support both of those. So if you had a unit that was using TRS Type A and another one that was using TRS Type B, you don't need a separate junction box or MIDI interpreter box to do that. You can just set the flexi ports up to do that. Use 2 separate flexi ports and control both units on there. There's also a bunch of other general MIDI settings on here. You can have MIDI through routing. This is so deep and vast. I am very, very impressed with it. But if we want to set up a switch like I've done here, you have the main switch settings where you can give it a name. I've set all these switches up to be momentary switches, but you have the option of toggles, tap tempos, sequential, linked sequential switching, scrolling switches on here. Look at all of this good stuff on there. A double press toggle a double press momentary. So you could set these up with a lot of different messages on here. I'm just going to go with tap or hold on here. You can even set up LFOs on the switches as well. This is very, very powerful and very cool. But for switch messages on the press release, again, not the press, but the press release. This is just the way I've made this work. Let's go in, I'll show you what I've set up. So we're on MIDI channel number 1 on both units. If you ever have problems with MIDI, check that you're on the same MIDI channel. That has got me so many times. But here is our all-important controller number 34. So this is saying to the FM9, hey, on controller number 34, you're set up to switch, or I should say not switch, but select scenes. And then we send a value that's going to correspond to each scene. So value 0 is going to select scene number 1. Value 1 is going to select scene number 2, and so on. So you can see I've got a control change message here. Controller number 34, that's for scene select, and I want to select scene 1 for my tap function. I've done that. I've set up a similar message over here with the hold release. So channel 1, controller 34, value 1. I can save that and go to the next switch, which is nice. And again, very, very similar things. I really like that you can actually just copy messages and paste them into different places. It makes not only reassigning messages easy, but editing them very easy. So you can see that's got value of 3 for the hold, that's got a value of 2 for the press, and same thing for the next switch on there. On the press release, we've got a value of 4, scene 5, and we've got a value of 5 for the hold on there. So now if I go back to my FM9, we can test this. If I press and hold, you'll see that that goes to scene 2. If I press and hold the middle one, it's going to give me scene 4. And if I press and hold the far right, I'm stretching all the way out here, that's going to give me scene 6. So I've got this set up now where I can select any of those 6 scenes as my starting point and then just add elements to it with the FM9. I'll give you a quick demo of how this might work. I'm going to use the Aero for scene selection, then I'll just add a bunch of effects a la carte as I go. Let's start on scene number 1. That's a really nice combination of the functionality and flexibility of scenes, then with a traditional what you see is what you get style setup on the FM9 foot switches. There's also channels being changed in the background with the scene. So for example, on my chunk scene, the drive is set up as a big muff, whereas on my crunch scene, it's an SD1 to boost the JCM 800, and it's a Crowther hotcake on the AC30 chime scene on there. So by having the scenes, not only controlling the bypass state, but by controlling channels in the blocks and then just setting this up as basically a custom set of effects per scene, I've got so much flexibility in there. And with the Aero, you can send 16 individual MIDI messages for the press or the press release or the hold function or the double tap function on there. You know, you could go even further. If you don't like the hold function, you could use double taps. You could use a double tap on one foot switch and a hold on another. You could also be using the TRS output to another unit. You've got 2 TRS MIDI outputs on there. If you've got units that can use USB MIDI, you've got a USB-C MIDI on there. So if you had like all the gear in the world, you can basically set up a bunch of custom MIDI messages from this tiny little device on here. And this is pretty basic MIDI programming with the Aero. You can really get deep into it. And if you'd like to see a video where I hook up, say, 5 or 6 different units and go totally crazy with all the different MIDI combinations on there, or maybe get another Aero and link them so that you've got 6-foot switches on there, there's so many ideas popping into my head with this. But as something to basically act as a little buddy and an expander for your Fractal device, it's kind of hard to go past this. Yes, it is more expensive than a lot of the cheap auxiliary switches you can get out there, but the fact that it can run their entire Bridge operating system on there means you've got this super powerful MIDI controller that can be expanded, that, as you can see, it's just sitting on top of my FM9. You could have it next to an FM3. It basically takes up no extra space in your rig. It can be powered with a standard kind of barrel jack or via USB-C. There's a web-based editor so you can change things on the fly and back up all your MIDI messages and programs, use it with different units. It's easily one of the most impressive little MIDI controllers, and I think one of the most essential add-ons you could get, especially to an FM3 or VP4 style rig. It's pretty rad with the FM9 and the big axe effects as well. Big thank you to Pirate MIDI for sending this out to me, and some of the people behind Pirate MIDI have even gone and written a book all about MIDI. There's the history of MIDI implementation with digital guitar effects. There's a bunch of tutorials which explain everything from program changes to MIDI CC messages and anything that you may have found a little hard to comprehend in this video. If you want to grab that book at a discount, it is linked in the video description. I do receive a small commission from that sale, so you'd actually be supporting this channel directly, keeping the lights on, keeping my cats happy and fed as well. If you'd rather support me directly, there are links to my Patreon and the music that I make with my band Ragdoll. I hope you enjoyed this little tutorial and demo. I'll see you on the next one. Thank you.